Thank you for joining us here on Law and You on Independent Television. We are in Benin City, Nigeria. I'm Uyi Agmofwegbe. On the program this week, we're turning our attention to perhaps one of the most topical issues as far as the anti-graft war in this country is concerned. Of course, it's no longer news. The EFCC now has an executive chairman nominated, confirmed, and has swung into action. And speaking of action, it appears one of his area of priorities as far as his mandate is concerned is to ensure that some of those aspects of this fight against corruption that had not been given prominence or visibility will now gain some very significant and tremendous attention. As a matter of fact, Mr. Abdulrasheed Bawa, the executive chairman of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, is now saying that from all of their investigations, it is clear and very established that there are banks and bankers who collude with politicians and others who are involved in corrupt activities to ensure that they have a field day. However, going forward, he says, look, there's a certain act that allows, that empowers an institution like the EFCC to be able to go after these persons. Of course, it also means that by extension, the federal government is well positioned, is empowered, and has all of the resources it needs to be able to ensure that, for example, you get a job with a bank as an employee. Right from that point, or within 2 weeks of being hired or offered a job, you are required, based on this very act, to declare your assets. And you're expected to do that even after you have left that bank, or after you transition from that bank to another bank. You ought to declare your assets again within a period of 2 weeks. One would have thought, for instance, that this kind of rule, as it were, essentially or basically or exclusively applies to executives of these banks. However, that's not the case. It applies to anybody who has been hired or who has become an employee of a bank in Nigeria. I mean, this is not an act that came up just yesterday morning, for example. It's been here for a long time. Apparently, one of the things Mr. Bawa is doing going forward is to ensure that this act gets a bite. We'll talk to you about that after this break. Stay with me. My guest on the program this week is Mr. Matthias Obayuana. He's a lawyer and a public affairs commentator. Thank you, Matthias, for coming on the program.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Yes.
You and I have talked a bit off camera about this act and what it means for the fight against corruption and how expanded it is in terms of scope. For example, I'm very sure most Nigerians watching right now are surprised as to what exactly this act is about, and the fact that, for the most part, we've not heard or seen it for decades.
Yes, for me, I actually was surprised. This Lodeni MR, Master of Rules, said, God forbid that a lawyer should know all the laws, but he should know how and where to find the law. So when this topic came up, I did my research and I came across the law, which is Bank Employees Declaration of Assets Act of 1986, which gives an obligation to every bank employee who has been defined to be any staff of the bank, whether as a chief executive or as a messenger or a gateman or any person at all, that works in the bank, to declare their assets within 14 days. First of the coming into effect of the act, and then within 14 days of such an individual joining that organization as a staff. The act went to the extent that even when the person, does a transfer to another bank, within 14 days of your joining in the new banking institution, you must also declare your assets, and you continue to also do it every year. Then even after 2 years, even after when you terminate your appointment with the bank, after 2 years after leaving, for every year for 2 years, you must continue to also declare your assets. Go back to the banking management, let them give you the asset declaration form, a specified form is in the act, that you declare your assets, and all this must be done, and then the banking executive have the obligation within 7 days to send a report of this asset declaration to the appropriate authority. And by the act, the appropriate authority will be defined to be the secretary to the federal government of Nigeria or any officer designated by him, by a gazette. It is strange to me because before now we used to know that it is the public officers, who are actually allowed to have asset
required to declare assets.
Required, yes, to do asset declaration. So you do that before the bureau.
Yes.
And then if you are found guilty, you can be sent to the asset declaration tribunal. But for private sector, which is the banking institution, I have not heard of it. But I find it in the law, as Bauer has hinted, that banking officers and staff must comply. And I'm sure, as surprised as I was until I found it, I'm sure many other banking officers may not have been aware.
Right.
I wonder whether they have been complying with that obligation to ensure that from year to year you declare your assets. And then it goes beyond that. The law has also empowered the federal government, to extend that same law, the application of that same law to any other individual, body, or organization, whether private or public, to ensure that every year they will also be declaring their assets to the appropriate authority, which is secretary to the federal government.
The act sounds universal, like it has a sweeping application from the narrative you have established.
Yes, for now the act is specifically related to employees of the bank, and also to the custom service. But there is a proviso that whenever the president deems it necessary,
right,
to have another body or organization, whether private or public, to also comply with the provision of that act, it can by public gazette, right, issue that authority to say, look, this act should also apply to certain individuals, whether private or public, to also be compliant and ensure that you declare your asset every year. And there are penalties, under the act, if you fail to declare your asset, or you make false declaration, or refuse to answer certain questions as provided in the asset declaration form which is given to you, you will pay a fine. If you are found guilty of it, you would be sentenced to imprisonment for 10 years. And then whatever asset that you fail to declare will be seized and forfeited to the federal government. The same applies to anyone who, for any reason, try to divert. They find the reason we try to divert.
Maybe conceal assets.
Conceal assets. So you transfer the asset to another person, and then you declare what you believe, what you want to declare. So when they investigate and find out that you conceal such an asset, the person who assisted in doing so will also face the music 7 years imprisonment, and then the asset which was concealed will be confiscated and forfeited to the federal government.
You see, I mean, off the top of my head, I'm still thinking, and I'm asking myself, is it not possible this kind of acts, by time the EFCC, for example, goes full throttle with its application, has the potential to create, as it were, some kind of log jam or some kind of bottlenecks within the banking sector, which is privately owned, for
yes,
example?
I think for the motive or mischief that the act seeks to cure is to ensure that the banking officers or employees of the bank or any other organization, they do not collude with other officers, whether in the public or private sector, to engage in acts of corruption, money laundering, and the rest of it. There's a provision also in the act that where they find out that the means of the income or the assets, because once you declare that asset, they have a responsibility of verifying that asset declaration and investigating it. And when you now compare the asset declared with the probable means of income of that particular banking officer, and then I found that you cannot justify having such assets with the means of income, such an individual could also be charged, and when found guilty, 10 years imprisonment, and all the properties that he could not justify by his means of income will also be forfeited to the federal government. So it's an act actually meant to check corruption.
Right.
But it's unfortunate that we have these beautiful laws in our books. It is the courage, to apply them. My fear now is that let it not be applied selectively.
Okay.
So if they want to go full throttle, let them ensure that even in the custom, every individual or organization that is found wanting, should be dealt with according to the law. So ensure that you declare your asset, ensure that you are not living above your income, ensure that every year, because from year to year you must continue to update that your asset declaration form. So whatever you have this year, you also show is what I have. The next year, if you have disposed of it, you also show okay, it's less that or more that, so that to check that people live within their income, you don't end up engaging in money laundering, pilfering, taking money. You can imagine what our people are doing. Look at the case of Delta State now.
Yeah.
All the money that we're taking abroad, they are asked money to be returned now. Delta State government say bring it back. Delta State people say bring it back to our state. The money came from here. The federal government say no, it's Nigeria's money. So they used to go and repair roads.
Besides, we were the ones who went ahead to fight to ensure that this money came out.
This money come back. So ordinarily, he ought to have gone to Delta State.
Right.
Now, but this is single individual. Abacha has done his own. You can see all the return of the loot. Then another individual will take money, public fund, and go and stash somewhere. Then you will suppose that some of the banking officers may be involved in helping them to conceal this money, helping them to do the packing and everything. So that is why, and at the end of the day, they may also get some kickback, from a tap on the back, pat on the back from all that they are doing. And they may end up living above their income. Yeah. So the act is actually meant to check all of these things. So let the banking officers stay clear. If the public officer or a private individual is engaged in money laundering, do not assist. Do not be encouraged to receive some kickback or advantage or any money at all to serve as an encouragement. Because if you do and the investigation and find out what you earn, you cannot justify what you have in your assets.
Right.
Then they could arrest that person and if convicted 10 years imprisonment and the asset that have been found to be more than his income confiscated. So the same law is there even in our Civil Procedure Act. The police on its own can also check any other person who is living above his income. Right. But we are in a country where people really do not care. When they find those making so much money, we hate them. We don't care to know how he makes his money. We don't care to know whether he's living above his income. That is why you find in every nook and cranny of our city, is how far they're looking at and not how well. How did you arrive at that position? Nobody care to know, but you have arrived. Yeah. That's what they are celebrating. So if they really want to go into all of this, they must be holistic. They must not be selective in their approach. So if any banking officer is involved, let that person be shown the way out. If a private individual is involved, let it be shown the way out. So for me, if they apply to each and every one, because according to the law, the Mr. President and the federal government, they are be empowered by the act to say at any time to say, okay, I want to, by a gazette, I want this law to be applicable to any sector. So if you observe that it is any sector that is immersed in corruption, they could make that act applicable. Declare your asset. Let us see how much you have. So it is not only public officer that declare asset. We have seen now that even private individuals have been made to declare asset. The banking institutions are private companies. The employees, they are not public servants, right. But yet by the act, they are asked to declare their asset, and they could also extend it by the act to any private individual, whatsoever. So all it to check out of corruption. So let us be holistic about it. It's a beautiful piece of legislation, but it could also be misused. To which on. So my prayer is that let Bauer ensure that it's holistic about it and not selective. So it is not a time to say, okay, fine, let us now, election period is coming. So let us now look out for those who want to contest election and will know how to handle them. Apply it holistically. Whether somebody is from the ruling party, somebody is from the opposing party, as far as you are in government, whether private individual whatsoever, and you are found to be living above your income, right. As far as that law is concerned, they should follow the law as it is. And then if Mr. President is also courageous enough to look at any other sector of government, whether private or public, to make that law also applicable, they can also do so, because the Code of Conduct Bureau and Tribunal is there for public servants. Right. But how often? The last time when they were dealing with the ongoing issue, certain persons filed petition before the Code of Conduct asking other public officers to also declare their asset. In fact, we even have access to the asset declaration form of those highly placed public officers like Mr. President and the rest of you. you know, they didn't make it available to them. They said it's confidential. They cannot make it available. Meanwhile, it's a public document. So if what is good for the goose is good for the gander. If you are going to make it applicable, it should be holistic. They must not be selective about it.
You see, it's even a good thing now that you brilliantly mentioned the Code of Conduct Bureau and, of course, by extension, the Tribunal. The Code of Conduct Bureau actually has been doing a great work with all of these assets declaration and so on and so forth, doing due diligence and all of that. Is there a chance that there's going to be, as it were, some sort of collision between this act we're talking about now, that essentially applies to banks, and the work or the act that establishes the Code of Conduct Bureau?
For me, I think it's a duplication of efforts.
Okay, so one stone could have killed two birds.
Exactly.
Okay.
I could imagine that in the act, rather than have you declare your asset to the president, or rather to an appointee of the president, the secretary
to the federal government, yes.
An appointee of the federal government, even though the Code of Conduct is also an appointee, but it's a more organized body. It's
more institutional.
More institutional. So than just a single individual. So either the secretary of the federal government or any of his appointees, any of his designates by gazette. So go and declare this asset and go and submit the form to them. That's the appropriate authority. The organ to try, the venue for trial is not provided. They say Federal High Court, though, that all matters of that nature should be tried at the Federal High Court, which is the venue for trial. You know, but the agency to carry out this trial is not provided, whether it is by the EFCC or any prosecuting authority. You know, like as we have in the Code of Conduct Tribunal, you know, the members of the tribunal that should look at the matter and draft the charge before the Code of Conduct, member of the Bureau, Code of Conduct Bureau, that will draft the charge before the Code of Conduct Tribunal, you know, arraign that person formally and then to be tried in the tribunal. Everybody follows that. But this is kind of taking that job away from the Code of Conduct Tribunal, Code of Conduct Bureau, and they have been set up and they are being paid salaries. So another organ of government is now be asked to take over this one. And this time around, it is more under the nose and control of the federal government. So the probability is there to misuse it. That's why I keep asking that Mr. Bawa should ensure that it stay clear from being manipulated by the executive,
by politicians,
ensure that the proper thing is done. You know, because keeping it under the nose of Mr. President and his secretary to the federal government. So only them will determine when you bring the asset to determine who to prosecute and who not to prosecute. You know, so according to certain political party, they said when you join the political party, your sins will be forgiven. So many people cannot cross carpet. If you are in PDP, you can come to APC so they can forgive your sins. That should not be the case. If somebody is found wanting, whether you are in PDP, you are in APC, or any political party whatsoever, they should investigate that person and ensure that they are prosecuted according to law without fear or favor. You know, so to say now that submit your asset only to the secretary, to the federal government, he decide who to prosecute, who not to prosecute, and all of that. For me, there's a little worry. So I could expect that kind of act be looked into. I hope it was not a probability decree, because most of the decrees now, you know, have been codified and turned to act. Right. Like we have the land use decree. It's not the land use act.
It's act now.
You know, so if that was a military decree, it had brought it to be, they should put some flair of democracy, separation of powers in it. You know, because the agency that you are going to report to now is an arm of the federal government. Though it is the same with the Code of Conduct. Because during the Honor case and when petition was written against the chairman of the Code of Conduct Tribunal, you know, that he granted an ex parte order to remove the CJN, you know, and a petition before the National Judicial Council and Federal Judicial Service Commission. He came out to say that he's not an appointee of the Federal Judicial Service Commission or the NJC, that is answerable to the executive. We're surprised that it was the executive who appointed him, who put him there. So whatever he does is answerable to Mr. President. So you can see the danger in that. He did that and he went away with it. But ordinarily under our laws, we cannot by an ex parte order make such far-reaching decision, you know, which remove on again as CJN. It happened because it was executive to executive. So this is another one now, another executive to executive. So they can also use to enchant anyone, you know, if they want to. So we pray that they use it, you know, with an altruistic motive, and not that, you know, to enchant anyone.
Okay. We're just going to take a break at this point, everyone. But fact is, so much has been established now as to this act, and going forward, some of the challenges it will face and how much of work will be ahead of the EFCC and by extension the anti-graft mechanism, as it were, in this country. We'll talk a bit more in a bit, but that will be after this break. Stay with me. As we wrap up now, I just want to ask you this quickly. Some person say, look, first, quote unquote, reactivating this act at this point by Mr. Bauer is probably indicative of his resolve to fight corruption from a different standpoint, which will likely be better than what we are seeing in the past few years. Others are also now talking about the fact that, wait a minute, this whole thing takes effect. I mean, the new act takes effect by June 1st, I hear. All right. Is that enough time to get things like this off the ground and running?
Well, the law, the act has been in operation. I think it's 26 September 1986.
Right.
You know, so it is not just now. So many people were not aware of it. So it's now.
That's almost 35 years.
Yes, it's bringing to the attention of the banking institution that there's an act like this that requires you, you know, to submit your assets and to do that every year.
Right.
So we know we did 14 days. So they are expected twice a year, the banking executive, to submit that report to the appropriate authority. So which is June, end of June, and December 30th is the windows.
Those are the two windows.
The two windows. So so every 6 months. So I'm sure when they say they have out in June, it's I think about 7 or 14 days, you know, in June, to ensure that all the assets are put together following the application of the law.
Yeah. And
then the banking executive must within before the end of that close of that window, or 30th of June, they must ensure that he submit the, you know, give the report, annual report. Is it 2 reports in a year, every 6 months, you know, to the appropriate authority to show the number of staff you have in your employment, those who have been newly employed, those who have left, and then they can use that one to check whether they are still submitting their asset declaration or not. So whether you have left the bank, like I said, 2 years window is given to you to continue to declare your asset, so that they can check. You know, so all of this actually ordinarily will check corruption. People will learn to live by their income and will not be outlandish, will not be engaging themselves in corruption, cannot steal and hide and be comfortable with it, and all of that. It will help if it's really applied. So we have beautiful law to ensure that there's no corruption in this country. But despite all of this, corruption is endemic. Corruption is a cancer. Corruption is what has eaten the fabric of this nation, that we cannot find ourselves where we are. In every sector of the economy, even in the petroleum industry, you see they say they made a mistake. I can't look at a mistake that was made, that you increased fuel to 212 naira. Now you came back to say it was a mistake. The agreement was a marginal increase of 1 naira. But those in the filling stations, they change their meter to 212 promptly. Promptly. They refuse to bring it down. So we have been buying fuel at that rate. That's not corruption. You know, so meanwhile there are laws to ensure that such things should not happen. So those every piece of legislation that we have, or law that we have, should be enforced, put into use, ensure that people comply, and you know, they can use some as examples, make a public show of them, so that others will follow. But my prayer is that they should not be selective about it, because the community have been with the present government, the selective justice. When you join the leading party, they cover your sin. When you leave, they expose it. No, it shouldn't be so. So every sin must be exposed and punished, so that others will learn, so that children yet unborn will learn. Because the first generation, by the manner in which they are leading this nation, by the attitude of those persons who are in office, who can easily cover their sins and get away with it, they are encouraging the younger generation to do such things, also get away with it. But when you punish those big fish and ensure that things does not happen that way, you apply the law to the letter. Become an example. Become an example. Others will learn not to follow that way.
Thank you so much, Barrister Matthias Obayiwana, for coming to talk to us about this issue. I feel tempted to saddle you with the task of helping us to monitor progress with this act as it goes. Again, thank you for coming. We appreciate it. That's our program for you this week. Thank you for watching, everyone. I'm Uyag Mofwegwe. Our coverage on ITV continues.